The harsh truth about Barack Obama: he failed. Opinion. All hope, no change. The world still swoons over Barack Obama, but we need to face the harsh truth about his presidency: it has been a crushing letdown. The greatest American presidents are renowned for what they did in office. Abraham Lincoln ended slavery. Franklin Roosevelt created the New Deal. Ronald Reagan stared down the Soviet Union. Mr. Obama will enjoy a broadly positive legacy, but for very different reasons. He's a cultural icon. History will remember him for what he represented, not what he accomplished. He has been an admirable role model, but an ineffective president. 8 years ago, when he first ran for the White House, Mr. Obama spoke of fundamentally transforming the United States. His idealistic speeches and extravagant promises captured the imaginations of Americans suffering through George Bush's wars and the start of the global financial crisis. Mr. Obama's achievements since then bear little resemblance to the soaring rhetoric, and many of them are about to be dismantled by Donald Trump anyway. His administration did oversee America's relatively slow economic recovery after the GFC, bringing the unemployment rate down below 5%. It also reformed the regulations governing Wall Street. But all of that was quickly overshadowed by Mr. Obama's top priority, the healthcare law known as Obamacare. The goal, to help millions of Americans who couldn't afford health insurance, was noble. The law itself, and the manner in which it was implemented, set Mr. Obama's presidency on a toxic path from which it would never recover. Early in his first term, with the Democrats in complete control of Congress, Mr. Obama rushed to pass the controversial law in a down-the-line partisan vote, overruling widespread opposition from the American public. No Republican voted for it, and in the midterm election several months later, the opposition party swept into power on a wave of anger. For the next 6 years, Republicans obstructed Mr. Obama's every move, preventing him from passing any other significant reforms. The president was forced to use his executive powers to circumvent Congress wherever he could, particularly on issues such as climate change and immigration. The problem? Mr. Trump can rescind those orders the moment he takes office. Even worse, the healthcare law itself is extremely unlikely to survive after Mr. Obama leaves the White House, as Mr. Trump and the Republicans have pledged to repeal it almost immediately. This means most of Mr. Obama's domestic agenda, including his signature achievement, will be entirely reversed within months. Mr. Obama's record on foreign policy is just as dicey. He advocated a less interventionist approach than George Bush, withdrawing from Iraq and rehabilitating America's image around the world. Those parts of his agenda, along with his decision to authorize the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, were popular. He also ended the decades-long trade embargo with Cuba, and forged an agreement with Iran aimed at curtailing the rogue state's nuclear weapons program, though Mr. Trump has indicated he will rip up both deals. Beyond those accomplishments, Mr. Obama has left Mr. Trump colossal messes to clean up in Libya, Ukraine and particularly Syria, which descended into a cataclysmic civil war on his watch. He was slow to react to the rise of Islamic State, famously comparing it to a junior varsity team, and mocked his opponent in the 2012 election for daring to call Russia a geopolitical foe. The 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back, because the Cold War has been over for 20 years, Mr. Obama joked. Since then, Vladimir Putin has annexed Crimea, flagrantly committed war crimes in Syria and apparently interfered in America's presidential election. So, on arguably the two greatest foreign policy challenges of his presidency, Syria and Russia, Mr. Obama has not managed to find answers. Mr. Obama's greatest disappointment, however, was his failure to honor the central promise of his 2008 campaign. Millions of voters were energized by his pledge to end the chronic gridlock plaguing Washington. Sarah Palin infamously referred to this as the Hopi changey stuff, And perhaps she was right to make fun of it, because the bipartisan dream Mr. Obama spoke of so eloquently never materialized. That wasn't all his fault. The Republicans were determined not to play ball, but he could have done far more. Mr. Obama is simply not the kind of politician that likes to get down and dirty with the kind of everyday politicking and the horse trading. He was simply not willing to engage in politics as it is usually done on Capitol Hill. Dr. Ronald Reagan, a lecturer in U.S. politics at the United States Studies Center, told News.com. After Mr. Trump's election victory, a lot of people have said that it's a kind of product of his personality and who he was previously. An academic, someone who's very aloof maybe. He'd rather debate things, he'd rather try to show that his argument is plausible or he has more evidence to support his course of action than make those compromises. There was a fundamental contradiction at the core of Mr. Obama's presidency. He sounded like a centrist, constantly talking a big game about bipartisanship, but in practice he was condescending towards his political opponents and unwilling to compromise. That greatly hindered his ability to negotiate with Congress, and coupled with the Republicans' own uncompromising shift to the right, it created the most polarizing environment ever in the U.S., Dr. Reagan said. That environment led directly to the rise of Donald Trump. It decimated the Democrats, whose numbers have plummeted at federal and state level. Mr. Obama's party has seen most of its rising stars turfed from office, and now there is no obvious leader ready to pick up the pieces when he's gone. Mr. Obama isn't the only one to blame for this, not even close, but it's an undeniable fact that he failed to bring the country together. Race relations have soured. Urban elites and rural voters openly sneer at each other. And in a sickening dose of irony, America's first black president is about to hand over the White House to the man who spent years hounding him with a racist birther conspiracy theory. It isn't all negative. Mr. Obama has been an exemplary role model in the Oval Office, as both a leader and an admirable father. He's suffered no personal scandals, and he has consistently appealed to Americans' better angels. We won't be able to say the same about Mr. Trump, and you suspect the world will soon look back on the Obama years with fond nostalgia. He will be remembered, perhaps even revered, as a progressive icon for decades to come, having personified a significant leftward shift in America's social values. But few will remember what Barack Obama actually achieved, and for a presidency that started with such remarkable promise, that can only be considered a failure.